In today's session, we're going to be talking about digital certificates, and this is a very important topic when it comes to security, right? And to kind of put things into context, I'm going to give a analogy here to exactly what a digital certificate is, right? So first of all, what are digital certificates, right? So they're basically a public key certificate, right? They're an electronic document, and it basically has the public key on the certificate, and it's basically showing you that who is the owner of the public key, right? And really, if we give an analogy here, it's basically a passport. The equivalent would be something like a passport comes in a physical book format. One could even argue that the passports do come in electronic forms with apps and all that kind of good stuff, right? But just to kind of keep it simple, passport, a physical book, right? Now, digital certificates is all about cryptography, right? It's used in the context of cryptography. Think in terms of public key, private keys, and all that kind of good stuff, right? And if we look in the analogy to the passport, right, it's really kind of identifying, it's providing identification and travel, right? That's when you're using it, right? And digital certificates are used in cryptography and things like SSL or TLS communications, right? Now, as I mentioned before, the digital certificate is proving the ownership of the public key. Is saying who you are, right? So it's saying, like, for example, Google is Google when you're talking to the Google server, right? The server belongs to Google, right? And in the passport world, it's proving who you are as an individual, right? That's what that passport's doing. So when you're traveling, it's basically saying, that this passport belongs to an individual, right? Um, Digital certificates are used in TLS communications to provide authentication. So going back to that, the Google scenario is proving that this server belongs to Google. And in examples like in MTLS, it does, it can also provide authentication on the client side as well, right? Um, Also, if you look in the passport, it's used when traveling to identify who you are, right? So that's an example there for passports, right? And then if we look at digital certificates, they have common fields in the certificate, right? Including the public key, the digital signatures, etc. So just be aware that there are common fields, and there's quite a few common fields in there, right? And if we look at the actual passport aspects of it, we do see common fields in a passport as well, right? There's the name, there's the date of birth, there's the passport number, etc. And just remember that these common fields are formatted. So when you look at a passport, they have specific formats associated with it, right? Just like the common fields in a digital certificate, right? Now, that's actually about the digital certificates, right? So let's take it a little bit to the next level, right? How does digital certificates get issued by who, right? And really, if you look at it, right, digital certificates are issued by certificate authorities, right? So they're, the analogy here would be that, passports are issued by the country's government, right? So, there is no one main certificate authorities. There's a number of certificate authorities, just like there's various governments around the world issuing passports in each of these countries, right? Same thing with certificate authority. There's a number of those, right? So that's we see a lot of similarities there, right? And the certificate authority can be considered as the trust center, is the de facto or authorian figure, right? Just like the government is, right? So the government is the trust center when it comes to the passports, right? They're the ones who's issuing it and all that kind of good stuff, right? In the certificate world, in the digital certificate world, really the trust center, the certificate authority is really managing that public key. It's all about the public key aspects of it, right? And in the passport kind of like world, it's really managing the passport, the government is, right? And then finally, the digital certificate is signed by the certificate authority. And, what that really means is that it's providing its stamp, right? So we trust the certificate authority along with, trusting the government, right? So the digital certificate, right, is signed, it's basically stamped, and it uses an X509 standard for doing that, right? And the equivalent of that is if you look on passports, right, you look carefully, there's various security that's been added to the government, right? They put their, unique signatures on the actual passports, and the government does that, right? And the government has its own standard way of doing it, right? Now, just to kind of like wrap it up, right? It's kind of like if you look at the certificate authority, it's doing a number of things, right? Just like a government does, right? It's generating the certificates just like the government generates passports and hands them out. There's the distribution of those certificates just like the government distributes and mails those out, passports out, right? And there's the revocation of certificates, right? So certificate authorities can do that as well, just like governments can cancel passports, right? So that's just really all about digital certificates. Thank you.